Welcome to the France 24 debate. Donald Trump says the Iran war will be over soon. Let's take a listen.
And when you look at the kind of things that are happening, we are doing that for one very, very important reason. We cannot allow them to have a nuclear weapon. So I think most people that understand that, they understand that what we're doing is right. It'll be over quickly. And
Donald Trump there saying that he thinks it will be over quickly. Does this sound familiar, is my question to you, wherever you're watching. The US president, of course, has said this in some way, shape or form a number of times in recent days. Let's give you a few documented examples of Trump saying that the war is over. March the 9th, Trump said the war was very complete, pretty much. March the 24th, reportedly he said that the US and Israel had won the war. April the 14th, to Fox Business, Trump said the war was very close to being over. Then April the 16th, CBS reporting Trump again saying the conflict was very close to being over. May the 1st, letter to Congress, he declared the hostilities had terminated. May the 6th or the 7th, or both, it had a very good chance of ending. Speaking optimistically about peace negotiations. Yet there is still no real solution on the horizon in the Middle East. Well, this Thursday, as we are here speaking to you right now, there is word of this 14-point memorandum of understanding, which is now being considered by Tehran. Key those demands being made by Washington is a moratorium on Iran's enrichment of uranium, and in return, there'll be a lifting of sanctions against Iran and an unfreezing of assets. But experts say this is really just scratching the surface. Let's take a look at the situation as it stands with this report, and after that, we'll meet the panel.
The French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle continuing its journey southeast towards the Gulf of Hormuz. The deployment of Europe's most powerful warship is part of a plan set up by France, the UK and some 50 nations to restore long-term maritime security along the strait once it has fully and safely reopened.
Once calm has returned, we can act on an independent international demining and escort system that is strictly defensive and peaceful. That is what we are working on.
The security situation remains fragile amid Iran's chokehold on the strait, with one of French shipping group CMA CGM's container ships hit while transiting it on Tuesday, injuring crew and damaging the vessel. Amid the tensions, Italy launched the Rome Coalition for Hormuz Thursday, an international cooperation platform to safeguard fertilizers and food security.
About 30% of the global trade of fertilizers pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The blockage is creating huge effects. Transport and insurance costs are increasing, putting strong pressures on global food affordability.
The UN's International Maritime Organization says around 1,500 ships and their crews remain trapped in the Persian Gulf, after Donald Trump stood down a short-lived American naval operation to escort vessels through the passage Wednesday, citing progress in negotiations with Iran. Hopes that they could reach even a partial deal led to oil prices falling Thursday. Iran has yet to respond to the United States' latest proposal that would stop the fighting and stabilize shipping through Hormuz, but leave the most contentious issues to be resolved in a broader agreement at a later date. Tehran says it has not yet reached a decision on the potential deal.
So we wait to see what happens with that. Our guests to discuss the situation, let me introduce them to you in no order of preference. Everybody here who's equally welcome. First, in Washington, D.C., Barbara Slavin joins us, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center. Barbara, always a pleasure to have you on the debate, and thank you for being with us. Here in the studio, we have two guests. First, let me introduce to you Bertrand Besancenot, former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Thank you, sir, for being with us as always.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
On the other side of the studio, and I stress not necessarily against, just on the opposite side of the studio, Pierre-Antoine Donnet, who is editor of the Asia magazine. Pierre-Antoine is also the former AFP correspondent based in Beijing. What a job that must have been.
Yes.
What a job that must have been. Let's get things moving here, talking about this situation as we read it. And oh, excuse me, we have another guest who's just joined us. I do apologise. Breakdown in communication in my ear, and our producer was on the ball. We have Arash Azizi. Hi, Arash. Great to see you. Arash Azizi is contributing editor at The Atlantic and author of among others, Shadow Commander Soleimani, the US, and Iran's global ambitions. Thank you for joining us. I understood you were late, but clearly you've broken all the records to get with us, and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you, sir, very much indeed. Let's get this underway then by bringing in Barbara to give us a first comment on where we stand so far. Barbara, this memorandum of understanding, do we understand any more than what is being reported? We clearly hear a number of issues that might be up for discussion about enrichment of uranium, unfreezing of assets, but in some ways it's not really scratching the surface. Give us your take on the situation.
Yeah, Donald Trump is desperate for an exit. He's been desperate for an exit almost since this war started. He's supposed to go to China next week. And he would very much like to have this wrapped up before then. Otherwise, as we see, the economic damage continues. He may be able to fool the stock market from time to time, but Americans know that gas is 50% more expensive. And we've seen, of course, the global damage to economies that are even more reliant on oil, gas, fertilizers than the United States is. So, you know, the United States is going to have to end its own blockade of the blockade. I think that's what's going to have to happen before the Iranians will show a willingness to come to the table.
Its own blockade of the blockade, because before February the 28th, when the US and Israel decided to bomb Iran, life wasn't perfect going through the Strait of Hormuz, but it was relatively smooth. That was my understanding of it.
The Iranians had never before tried to interfere with traffic, at least not since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. So this is entirely an own goal by the United States and Israel. Their attack on Iran, which was no imminent threat to anyone, produced this situation.
Barbara, for now, thank you very much indeed for kicking us off. Let's come to the studio and let loose Bertrand and Pierre-Antoine to give us a sense of what they're feeling. Barbara was saying, Pierre-Antoine, that Trump is going to go to China. He'd like to have this wrapped up by then. China's already said that they'd like to see this whole situation resolved and everything resuming through the Strait of Hormuz and things being back to some kind of normal. Where do we stand with that one? Because clearly when Trump goes there, if Trump goes to Beijing, because, you know, it may yet be cancelled, who knows what will happen, he'll be going there expecting to be marching in as the man who's resolved the situation. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, does it?
I think it's going to be the opposite, in the sense that it's a huge fiasco for the US. And the Chinese are rejoicing at that very much. So he will try to, well, make it sounding okay. But the Chinese are going to take profit out of that in their bargaining to come with them.
So this is part of the Chinese policy of, I've heard experts call it strategic ambiguity. So they'll say one thing, but in fact be looking for 5 other ways of getting out of a situation or basically profiting from it. Do you think China just sees this as another way that they can cash in, they can make money?
It's not only the question of money, it's a question of prestige and influence of America and in Asia. Because this fiasco gives China more leverage on its neighbors. And for Japan, for South Korea, for Taiwan, of course, it's really very bad. Also, another aspect is a military situation, because the US Army used a lot of ammunition, a lot, enormous stock vanished out of this war on Iran. And the Chinese also know very well all that. Why that? Because they had a ship based in next to Oman, a spy ship who knew everything. And actually, we could say that probably they were also feeding the Iranians about what the Americans are doing.
That sounds like an extremely dastardly development, a really, I don't know, duplicitous situation for China to be in.
Sorry?
It sounds like a very sort of tricky, duplicitous situation for China to be in.
Yeah, for the Chinese, they just had to wait. Because they know Iran much better than Trump knows Iran. He knows nothing about Iran, and the proof we have now, today. And they know they should be out of the game, because they have their own game, a long game, and they are winning.
Pierre-Antoine, for now, thank you very much indeed. Across the studio, Bertrand Benonsano, former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. I'm looking for a diplomatic interpretation of what we're seeing here. Memo of understanding sounds great and highfalutin to someone like me, looking at it from a distance. What does it mean in practice? What are they discussing? What kind of things could be concrete? Do you think there's anything in this?
No, I think it is only a kind of framework of what should be discussed. And of course, we know that the priority are two things. The first one is reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And clearly, the Chinese can help in this process because they are themselves interested in having the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And also, they have their specific relationship with Tehran. So they can be seen as the one who are delivering the real reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, President Trump will say, I have been the one who have been discussing with both sides, and it is, of course, I have been reopening myself the Strait of Hormuz. It is because of my policy that it is the case. But the reality is exactly as you said, the Chinese are benefiting from the situation, and I'm convinced that at some point they will have this role of being a kind, I wouldn't say a mediator, but at least presenting themselves as the one who are facilitating the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. So this is very clear. Now, the second aspect is, of course, the nuclear issue, where there has been already a lot of discussion, even with the Omani at some point. So we know that the elements of a kind of bargain or compromise are already on the table. That means that the Iranian will have a kind of moratorium on the enrichment of uranium. I don't know what will be about the stock of enriched uranium, maybe with the Russians or maybe diluted on the spot. But this is clearly an element where I think it will be more easy to find a kind of compromise. So if you have the two elements, the reopening of Hormuz on one hand and a compromise on the uranium, you have already a package. But this doesn't mean, of course, that the other elements, and in particular the missile program, will be tackled, or at least at this stage. And this is an element of worry for the Gulf states, because, of course, for them, the most important thing is to have some kind of limitation of the Iranian program on missiles. And on that, for the time being, there is nothing, but maybe it will be another step of negotiation. And
in terms of the fact, Bertrand, just staying with you for a second here, maybe I'm being a bit too hasty about these things, but I'd have expected some kind of response to come from Tehran to this very small. It's a one-page memo, so it's not pages and pages to go through, but at least it's something to begin a discussion. No response yet. I mean, what do we read into that?
No, but they are raising the stakes for one good reason. They can see that President Trump is in a very difficult situation right now. So they know that they can just waiting a little bit and ask for other things. They want to make sure that they will give the less possible on the nuclear thing, and of course nothing on the missile. So for them, they have the feeling that time is running for them, much more than for President Trump. So this is why they are not in a hurry to give an answer, and they know that this is the way that they will get the best deal at the end of the day.
Bertrand, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to New York. Arash Azizi is waiting there, contributing editor at The Atlantic, author of Shadow Commander, Soleimani, the US, and Iran's global ambitions. Great to have you with us, sir. I'm glad you plugged in, and I hope you're hearing everything and you've been able to absorb what people are saying so far. We want to hear what you think about this situation, memorandum of understanding, reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, what goes on, but also any insight you can give us as to how people in Iran may be absorbing this one. Clearly, that memo of understanding is being considered by Tehran. We're not getting any news out of the country as yet. What do you think they'll be discussing? What do you think they will want?
Well, if you look at the beginning of this week, there was the danger of the resumption of the war was very real. Many people thought it was imminent. Iran attacked the UAE. And yet both sides stepped back. US declared that it didn't consider this a violation of the ceasefire. Iran also, didn't really take responsibility for the attacks on the UAE, and anyway, didn't go toward a full resumption of the war. So there is serious interest in both sides for a negotiated deal. The question is if they can, if they can overcome the gaps. What Iran wants is for some sort of its sovereignty over the Hormuz Strait to be recognized, for it to be able to gain some monetary gain that could help it in reconstruction of the country, and for its financial, interest to be taken care of by lifting of the sanctions and its economy by unfreezing of its assets. That's what it wants. The question is what it is willing to give, how much limits on its nuclear program or other programs. And I think the U.S. is really primarily just asking for nuclear program. How much limits will Iran accept that would be acceptable to the other side? It's possible to find a formula that works for both sides.
Arash, this is the nuclear program that we were told by Donald Trump last June. June the 22nd, the strikes happened, if I recall correctly, that it was basically destroyed. And then once again, we've been told since February the 28th that it has been basically destroyed. But nonetheless, we understand it is still operational. There's still a big issue. And clearly there are matters to be resolved. In between time, with these targeted strikes, ordinary Iranians are being killed as well. I think it's over 3,000 people have lost their lives during the various airstrikes that have happened on Iran. The people of Iran deserve better, don't they?
Yes, the people of Iran are having a terrible time. The war was terrible for them. The economic destruction that has followed the war. More than 1 million people have lost their jobs in the last few weeks. And of course, they also face terrible repression. Up to 20,000 Iranian protesters were massacred by the regime in January. There have been executions since. Political prisoners are in very precarious conditions. Narges Mohammadi, Nobel Peace Laureate, is now on the 7th day of her hospitalization. She's literally fighting for her life because of the terrible conditions she's kept in. So all in all, it's a terrible time for the Iranian people, and one where their future is also very unclear. That with this new leadership and with these negotiations with the U.S. and with the fact that we are the war has only found an inconclusive end. It hasn't really ended. There's a ceasefire. So all in all, a terribly concerning time for the people of Iran.
Arash, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Barbara Slavin, I hope you can still hear us there in Washington. Barbara, of course, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center. Trump said that the nuclear program was basically taken out of commission. He said that last year. He said it again. It's not the case. The other thing he said before the bombs were launched is that he was trying to help the ordinary people of Iran. Now, there's not much being said about the ordinary people of Iran. The regime, one can argue, and I don't think anybody would deny, should be changed because it is doing things to ordinary people in Iran that should never happen to anybody. But nonetheless, the dropping of bombs, again, isn't a constructive thing for them to go through.
I think Trump tried to convince himself that these attacks would bring down the regime, but of course it became apparent very rapidly that killing the top leadership of the Islamic Republic did not bring down the regime. It nearly shuffled some of the chairs on the deck of not quite yet the Titanic. There's a new report that's just come out suggesting that Iran can last 3 or 4 months without feeling the effects of the American blockade. This is apparently from the CIA. And to build on what Arash said, Iran has just created something called the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, which is sending emails to shipping companies telling them how they can cooperate with Iran to resume shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. So these are not the actions of a regime that looks ready to capitulate to American demands. That said, I think there is a formula for resolving this if the United States makes reasonable requests and no longer beats its chest and acts in such a triumphant manner. I think there definitely is a formula for suspending enrichment, limiting enrichment, and resolving the stockpile of uranium problem.
As you're speaking to us, Barbara, we're seeing images of the new Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who no one has seen in public since February the 28th, when it's understood he was badly injured. Who is leading Iran is one of the questions that many people ask at this point in time. There seems to be a sense of who is actually in charge. And then, of course, how they will decide to respond to this memorandum of understanding, of course, remains to be seen. In terms of what happens next, though, Barbara, do you feel that in some way Donald Trump's attitude, his rhetoric, the way he says things and how he says things is actually one of the major obstacles in getting towards some kind of agreement?
Yeah, I think it is a problem, particularly for a country like Iran, to be addressed in such a disrespectful manner. The other issue, of course, is that Trump likes to personalize diplomatic negotiations, and there's no Iranian leader who is going to do a photo op with him, or even with J.D. Vance at this point. So he's not able to use his usual tactics in order to bring a resolution of the crisis. He has to use the tools of diplomacy, and he's not very good at that.
Barbara, for now, thank you very much indeed. Back to the studio, Pierre-Antoine of the Asia magazine, former AFP correspondent in Beijing. You gave us a moment ago a sense of how China might be looking at this one. Of course, Pakistan, just to sort of like broaden your remit a little bit, is the mediator here. For some people that came as a surprise, but Pakistan has a voice, has a relationship with both countries. Why not? And obviously is working well on this one. How much pressure, persuasion can Pakistan put on both sides to try and work this one through, or is Pakistan just a conduit for this to take place, if it takes place?
It's interesting to see you mentioned the word duplicity. And actually, I would take back this word to say that on the world stage, China is always saying we are for peace, we are a peacemaking country, a peace-loving country, and so forth. But actually, Pakistan is clearly an ally of China since already quite a few years. Yeah. And choosing Pakistan as a mediator was fantastic news for China, because behind Pakistan, they were actually handling the situation. And we saw the foreign minister of Iran going to Beijing. Actually, he went there, but there is no need for him to go there, because they are communicating all the time.
So are you saying China's actually sort of pulling the strings behind the scenes?
Indeed.
It may be Pakistan, but China's like this.
Indeed. And, also, one thing has to be said is that, of course, China relies on the oil from the Middle East. About 40% comes from there. But they have enormous reserves. They could live without this petrol coming from the Middle East for months. They have at least 6 months reserves in terms of petrol. So there was no need for them to be really worried. They were just waiting. But what I see is that now there is a loss of confidence to come for the next years in Asia, in the Middle East. Not only lost face, I think it actually don't really care about losing face. We saw that many times. But this time it's a major blow for the US in terms of influence worldwide.
Loss of confidence in the United States, which some might say began with Donald Trump slashing aid programs and the kind of soft power that the US has been using since the end of World War II to create a better world. And in many ways that has worked. Some might say that sometimes the US's interest in other countries is less than a healthy one. But I think on the whole, if you look at the aid programs, it's worked extremely well and done good things. So that's made, through all of that has made people's confidence in the US fall. You're saying now it's going to get worse.
It's a disaster. It's a total disaster in terms of soft power, because also on this ground, China is benefiting a lot. It's easy for them to brand the US or to make other countries branding the US as imperialist. The fact was there, when they started the war. I remember the experts saying that behind the scene there is a willingness from the Trump administration to use the energy to contain China. When we saw what they did in Venezuela, that was the first step. And then the ambition to control Greenland. And now Iran. But this says, if there is a willingness to do so, it has failed as well.
Indeed. One wonders whether Trump thought going into Iran would be just as easy as it seemed going into Venezuela was. Surely he wasn't thinking that it would be that simple. Surely not.
Of course not.
No, of course not. Not at all. Thank you very much indeed. Bertrand, can I bring you in to get a perspective from the Gulf states, of your experience of Qatar, of Saudi Arabia, of the whole region? I mean, clearly, the US attacks Iran. Iran then starts shelling the Gulf states. It seems incredibly unfair for the Gulf states to suddenly be the victims of a war that they had no part in, they wanted no part in, they didn't start, they don't contribute to, but all of a sudden this happens. And I'm wondering, sort of, from their perspective, what are they hoping for right now?
Clearly, when we are talking about the loss of confidence vis-à-vis the US administration, this is quite clear. And in particular coming from the Gulf states, because they have been trying to convince President Trump not to go to this war, because their main priority is clearly to achieve their so-called Vision 2030. That means to attract foreign investors on their big economic programs. And they know very well that if you are in a zone of conflict, of course, the investors are not coming. So they have tried clearly to convince President Trump, but he preferred to listen to Netanyahu. And this is another element, because they are quite happy in a way to see a kind of loss of influence of Iran in the region. Yes, this is clear. But at the same time, they don't want to know now a new hegemon that would be the Israeli one, especially with a personality like Netanyahu, who is an extremist, clearly. So for them, it is a very difficult situation. They say, our ally, the US, our protector, but of course, the equipment, the military equipment coming from the US has been effective, but they have lost many of their assets there, and they were risking at some point to have bombing by Iran on their own facilities, not only energy but as well the plants and the
Emirati pipeline.
Yes, and desalination powers. So for all these reasons, they feel that not only they have not been listened to, but now they are the first victim of this war. And they don't rely anymore, they don't trust President Trump, because they know that he says something and he does something else. He has been manipulated by Netanyahu as he has been manipulated by Putin. So sometimes they feel that they have to find another way. This is why you can see a kind of new coalition between Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Qatar, because they want to have additional guarantees of security. And they feel that, of course, with their new defense pact with Pakistan, it is important because it is a nuclear power and it is a military power, by the way, as well. So they want to say to the American administration, you are always telling us you dislike our policy, but you have no alternative. But now they can say, no, of course, we are interested in preserving this security guarantee from the US, but we have also alternative as well. We have excellent relationship as well with China, which is now our first partner, commercial partner. Most of the oil from the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf is going to China or to India. So for them, the Western world is less and less a partner, and more it is Asia for the time being. So you can see this change of balance in the region, and of course it means that the American soft power has been seriously reduced by this war. This is clear.
Bertrand, you said, I think, that Netanyahu dragged the US into the war. Now, I need to point out, because people who are fans of Donald Trump, supporters of Trump, will say, well, hang on a minute. Marco Rubio said that wasn't the case. Peter Hegseth, Defense Secretary or War Secretary, depending on which interpretation one wants to put on it, said that wasn't the case. Trump has said that wasn't the case as well. You disagree?
But nobody believes them because
lies.
it is so clear.
They're lying.
It is so clear that they are lying. So it is disinformation. That's all.
I have to bring these things up.
Okay.
Let's go to New York. Arash Azizi waiting for us, contributor at The Atlantic, author of Shadow Commander, Soleimani, the US and Iran's Global Ambitions. Sir, I know you've been listening to what's been said and you can pick up wherever you like. My question to you, though, would be, are we expecting some kind of news that's going to be positive? I mean, clearly the stock markets like what they're hearing, but I don't think that's any way to interpret anything, is it? That the stock markets go up and down on the possibility of the Strait of Hormuz reopening and oil prices will drop because of that. I don't think that's the gauge we should put on this. Geopolitically, sir, do you feel that we're getting towards a point that both sides could be happy with? What's your sense of it?
Yeah, first of all, I don't agree that it was Israel that drove the United States to the war. I want to say I don't think it's obvious at all. Obviously, Israel has wanted the United States to go to war against Iran for a very long time, but the U.S. presidents have a chance to say no, and they've often said no. If President Trump decided to say yes and go to the war, it's because he had his own calculations, he had his own reasoning, and blaming it on Israel really doesn't do it. Israel has its own interest. It's the United States that decided to do this. It owns it. It also controls Israel, as you see. When the United States stopped Israel from attacking, they stopped. Israel is clearly beholden to the U.S. here and listening to what they're saying. Now, as for good news, look, I mean, the good news is there is little will on either side to want to return to the war. And they do envision an end to this. And perhaps even a more durable end, not just to the war, but to the hostility between each other. It's just a question of how it could get done and in what time frame. And they also have a mediator in Pakistan that has great ties with both sides and is really interested in getting this done. So I think it's still, if you ask me, the most likely outcome is this ending in a negotiated deal.
A negotiated deal. You mentioned that the US told Israel to stop and they stopped. I mean, in the Gaza Strip, it didn't work that way, did it? There were a number of occasions the Americans said, stop bombing, and of course, Israel didn't listen. Israel has said that it's ready to respond in kind if any attack comes their way, basically on standby to relaunch the war at the drop of a hat. Do you think, basically, I mean, I'll put the point to you. I know you've said that Netanyahu didn't drag the US into this, but some people say that's the contrary to that. Do you feel that that could be something that will be at play still? If Israel wants to pursue this and wants to push this further, the US will have to follow.
Well, President Trump did push a ceasefire in Gaza on Israel as well. But yeah, he doesn't control everything that he does. But on this issue, President Trump particularly has quite a hold on Netanyahu. And in general, the U.S., I mean, if it wants to show its displeasure at Israel, if it, doesn't support its or even take more drastic measures, it could restrain it, basically, if it really wants to. The relationship, the power imbalance in the relationship that it could want to. Of course, Israel could decide to go in its own way and sort of really threaten its relationship to the United States. It has happened before in history. But, like Israel, President Reagan was no fan of Israel's invasion of Lebanon. President Eisenhower was no fan of its invasion of Egypt. He was able to push it back in the latter case. So, these are independent actors, and no one, they can push each other here and there, but they're independent actors and they make their own decisions. I think on the U.S.-Iranian file, if U.S. and Iran are to reach some sort of an agreement, Israel will have a very hard time to try to exploit it by military action, because it will find itself isolated even further in the region by Europeans and by the U.S. So it could try, but the other parties will have a good chance of stopping it. To give another example, in the 1990, in the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein's Iraq tried to draw Israel in by attacking it directly, but Israel didn't respond back. And all other countries were able to keep it on, and Israel didn't become party to the war, and the pushing Saddam by Western and Arab forces out of Kuwait continued. So my point is that even if Israel wants to do what Saddam did in 1988, try to ruin a deal that is happening, other countries in the region, including Iran, can act smartly and stop it from happening.
Arash, thank you very much indeed. Ceasefire, of course, can mean many things to many people. There is still obviously fire being exchanged, say, in South Lebanon. There was a strike on Beirut yesterday by the Israelis hitting a Hezbollah commander. All these, of course, linked via Iran's sponsorship, financially and militarily, of Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen. We could go on, and that could be part of the final agreement, Iran agreeing to not sponsor those groups. Pierre-Antoine, you wanted to make a point. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to make a bet tonight. I think that there will be an agreement in the week to come.
Okay.
Why that? Because the Chinese are intelligent, smart enough to give some face to make sure that he comes to Trump, to make sure that he comes to Beijing, because they need his visit. So they will make sure that he comes in some kind of good spirit. And, so we'll see. But there is 1 week to come before he takes his plane to Beijing.
So that is the prediction from Pierre-Antoine Donnet. There will be an agreement in the week before the visit to Beijing.
Some sort of agreement.
Okay, we're noting that one down, and we'll probably get reaction on the social media as it all goes through. Let's go back to Washington, D.C., where Barbara Slavin's waiting for us, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center. Barbara, over to you. Any point you'd like to make right now, given what's been said, and give us your sense of how we're moving?
Yeah. On the Israeli role, I think obviously Netanyahu played a huge role. He came to Washington 7 times to plead his case. He got Trump to join the war against Iran last June. And then in February of this year, he convinced Donald Trump that the Iranian government was going to fall, that the protests that we saw in January, the bloody crackdown and so on, suggested that just one massive strike to get rid of the leadership of the country would be enough to bring down the Iranian regime. And he told Donald Trump that on his watch, this terrible government that had bedeviled the United States for 47 years would fall, and Iran and Trump would get his legacy achievement. So you can fault Trump for being gullible enough to swallow this and showing poor judgment. But I don't think we can diminish the role of Benjamin Netanyahu in persuading Donald Trump that this ridiculous war was a good idea.
And in terms of regime change, which is something Donald Trump says has happened, Barbara, I mean, it's hardly the case if you kill the Supreme Leader and the Supreme Leader's son is then put in charge.
Well, what we've seen is a number of IRGC retreads being called out of retirement, people who were not doing very well in the system, but were still part of the system, have been brought to the fore. Even the negotiator Kalibov, someone who ran for president repeatedly, lost repeatedly, is extremely corrupt. As is Mohsen Rezai, who's another IRGC retread, who's been called back up. So if anything, we have a less able, less intelligent leadership, less nuanced leadership than we had before. That said, Iran does need a deal. It can hold out for some months. It can probably hold out longer than Donald Trump can. But it does need a deal. And I think, and I agree with Arash, that there is one to be had. I'm not sure if it'll come just before Trump goes to Beijing. That certainly would be a feather in the Chinese cap. But again, Trump has to give up the this maximalist language, this I win, you lose language. He has to give the Iranians some face and put forward demands that are realistic to get to the next stage.
Here in the studio, Bertrand Besancenot, a former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, with a point to make, sir.
Yes, I agree with the idea that if there is some kind of agreement between the US and Iran, which is possible, I agree with you. Of course, it will be difficult for Netanyahu and for the Israelis to try to go on with a fight on Iran. But the problem is that Netanyahu might go on with his obstruction policy and compromising policy in Lebanon and in Gaza. So if he cannot get what he expects from on Iran. He will play his usual extremist game in Lebanon and in Gaza. We can see that the so-called Trump plan on Gaza for the time being is in a stalemate, and Netanyahu has done all what he could in order to do so. And you can see that on Lebanon, with the bombing going on where we are supposed to be in a ceasefire, and you can see the pressure which is put on President Aoun shows that President Trump might be flexible once more with Netanyahu on Lebanon and on Gaza. This is the problem.
So massive humanitarian situation out of control in Lebanon because of the displacement of more than 1 million people due to the Israeli military operation in the south of Lebanon against Hezbollah, and of course strikes on south of Beirut as well.
Yeah.
Just talking about the one that happened last night, killing the Hezbollah commander. We're seeing in the Red Sea the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier moving to that area. Operations, President Macron's confirmed it's a Franco-British idea to try to secure the Strait of Hormuz in some way, shape or form. It's not war, it's a more of a defensive and conciliatory kind of move. That's what they're saying. Some say if it's a duck and it quacks, it's a duck. You know, sort of, should we just be sort of looking at it as it is, or should we sort of take the interpretation we're getting from the people in power?
No, the idea is clearly, if there is an agreement, at some point, if you want to reassure the insurers, you have to have some kind of military assets that would give the sense that we are going back to a kind of normal situation. So this is why the coalition initiative would be welcome, and it will be a way to give an answer to President Trump, who has been asking for something from the others. So this is the rationale behind it.
Bertrand, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Arash in New York. Arash, the contributing editor of The Atlantic. Arash Azizi, your sense about this situation, because clearly, you know, we're talking here, and I don't know who's watching us wherever they are in the world, but they might be wondering, you know, why the price of their petrol is going up, why the price of other derivative products are going up too. What is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, what has happened to Iran, is affecting everybody across the world. The knock-on is phenomenal. Now, clearly, people would like all this to be resolved. Do we see that happening soon? Do you see a solution on the horizon?
First of all, yes, the effects, we have to remember the effects actually on the West are much less than effects across, you know, Asia. In Pakistan, there are schools that are shut down early, cricket matches that are, that are shut down because of energy problems. All over Southeast Asia, that's the case, and closer to home. I think Egypt at some point had a curfew of 9 p.m. That probably was during when the war was active. But so the effects are huge, and they're indeed global, and they'll also continue for years. They hit that Qatar's gas facility have taken, for example, all the countries that rely on Qatar, like Pakistan is one, it will be hurt. So look, there is a possibility of an agreement and of a breakthrough. Both sides would need to also think about whether they'll like to first resolve this issue that was a non-issue, as Barbara pointed out, before the war, opening this strait, before they get into more durable problems such as the nuclear issue. I think that would be key. If they can come to an agreement that puts out a framework onto how to discuss about other issues, but meanwhile ends this disastrous war, has the strait opened, that's certainly something that is possible. And I think I'm not sure about next week, as my colleague here says, but I think it's quite possible that it will happen certainly before the end of the month.
So that's the Strait of Hormuz. That's the thing that really everybody wants to see reopened in terms of re-establishing trade. Pointing out again, before February the 28th, when the bombing started, of course, trade was going back and to in the Strait of Hormuz with no problems.
That's right. That's right.
So if we get back to that situation quickly, that would obviously make everybody feel a lot more secure and comfortable about what is happening, not just in their petrol pumps, but also in all the products that are made because of the oil that is brought out from the Persian Gulf. Arash, thank you very much indeed. Back to the studio as we're running towards the end of this programme. Here we have in the studio, we have Pierre-Antoine Donnet, editor of the Asia magazine, and the former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Bertrand Besancenot. Pierre-Antoine, you're the man who's betting on this being resolved by next week. I mean, clearly, what we're seeing on the Strait of Hormuz, we have Marco Rubio talking about 10 sailors have died being stranded on those boats there. We don't know the circumstances. It could just be the fact that they're stuck on a place and they were subject to ill health and they died because of that. But nonetheless, 10 people losing their lives when they're just doing their jobs. This is not fair by any standards. It's wrong that that happens. The fact that, you know, people doing their essential tasks of bringing supplies to and from the Persian Gulf are a threat right now is wrong, isn't it? The whole thing is wrong. So in terms of getting this open, how can this happen without a major international operation? Do you think sending the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier to the region is actually part and parcel of what the future is going to be like? Is it going to be something that is going to be policed by an international group in some way, shape or form, with France, with Britain, with the United States?
It must be so, but it remains to be seen if it's going to work or not. Because when we see the situation today, I would agree with the lady saying that actually the fact is that the regime is stronger than before in Iran. And you have the radicalists now coming back. So, and they also showed to the whole world how powerful they are there. While the US, supposed to be the biggest military power in the world, lost the war. So let's see what's going to happen.
Pierre-Antoine Donnet, thank you very much indeed. Editor of the Asia magazine, former AFP correspondent in Beijing. Thanks to Bertrand Besancenot, former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Thank you to our guests joining us from afar. They are Barbara Slavin, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Centre. Barbara, thanks as always. Great to have your input in everything we do here at France 24. And thanks to Arash Azizi joining us from New York, contributor at The Atlantic, author of Shadow Commander, Suleiman, the US, and Iran's Global Ambitions, and of course other books as well. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to you all. Thanks to you all for watching. Stay with us here in France 24.